Todd, you're welcome. Thank you very much for joining us again. Todd, the Kimpact report is out, 206% increase. You are a peace advocate, and I'm wondering how significant this development is when it comes to peace before the election or even during and after the election. What's your take?
Well, thank you for having me. It is a serious issue because electoral violence is not just morally wrong, it is also a crime because the moment you cross the line from pushing your political campaign into violence, it becomes very serious. And it is not just, it is also violates the Constitution, it also violates the Electoral Act. And, at this junction, we must move from the era of reaction to prevention. We have noticed that the Osun politics is quite volatile at this time, and our law enforcement agencies must swing into action and ensure that they don't only react when people have been killed, that we can actually prevent this.
So, Todimu, the Justice Development and Peacemaker Center is calling for stronger intervention by political parties and also traditional institutions. Who should take the lead in these final days as we approach? It's only about 4 or 5 days, if I'm not mistaken, about 4 days. Who should take the lead?
Honestly, for me, I feel that we should not at this point say that one particular person should take the lead. However, if I'm going to advocate that one party takes the lead, it will be the political parties and the candidates. You can make your point. You can actually go into the polls without violence. You can be aggressive about getting votes, but the moment you cross the line and becomes violent, then you have broken the law. So the political parties must speak to their followers, must speak to their supporters, that we can actually ensure that there's a free and fair election, and that it must not just descend into the arena of violence. People can go to the polls and choose their leader. For God's sake, it is not a do-or-die affair as they have painted it.
Okay. Todimu, something very interesting is happening this election, and that is, well, it has to do with access to the international world, or at least a very big community. That's because the incumbent governor's nephew, Davido, that's David Adeleke, he appealed to Donald Trump and the international society to actually monitor very carefully these elections. I'm wondering what impacts that would have on the elections, whether violence or the polls itself or the votes.
Well, over the years, we have had international observers. The UN, even ECOWAS, has sent observers to monitor elections. Particularly, they monitor the presidential polls. And we also have pressure groups and NGOs who monitor these elections, and it is a step in the right direction. If the politicians in Osun State cannot necessarily go to the polls without being violent, and they feel that they need international observers to monitor them and ensure that they do the right thing. It's quite an unfortunate development, but it is a welcome development. At least when the searchlight is beamed on them, it would ensure, or at least give them some level of decorum and compliance.
Todimu, I'm wondering what would invalidate the elections for Osun State. I'm sorry if I sound like a harbinger of bad news, but let's consider this. If anything was to happen and the elections was to be disrupted by substantive violence, at what point do you think that this would become a legal matter or could become a legal matter, as we've seen so many Osun elections get to?
Well, like you rightly opined, that nobody is an harbinger of bad news, but from the antecedents, people will say that the Sunday that will be good, you would have known from Saturday, and you will see that from the outbreak of violence, even as of this morning, 4 people were killed just a few days to the election. It means that the Electoral Act, particularly Section 90 to 92, is very clear that the moment you involve violence in election is an infringement, is a breach of that law. That means that if the violence is substantial, the INEC looks at it if it's widespread and people were stopped from voting, from casting their vote, they were disenfranchised. On the metrics of how rampant it is, it might affect the outcome of that election. INEC might decide that no votes were casted in particular regions and decide that there should be a rerun or a cancellation of that election.
So if this election doesn't go as planned, could it ever happen that Osun State could have a period without governance? Well, we've seen this in River State, well, partially, and I'm wondering what constitutional law could guide guide this period if there was to be such.
Well, in instances like this, INEC will be required to, conduct a rerun. And in the instance that the tenure of the president of the governor has elapsed, the law requires that the next person in line, that is the House of Assembly, would elect somebody that would stand in the interim. And the election must be conducted within a certain time frame to ensure that the governor is validly elected. But the worst case scenario is that a state of emergency will be declared.
It's a shame that for this election, the biggest topic has to be violence or insecurity. And it's a shame that my next question has to still be on that, because I'm wondering if political actors are found to have sponsored or maybe even encouraged violence before during the election, what the legal consequences they would face could be. Well,
like I said earlier, the Electoral Act, Section 90 to 92, talks about that it is an offense for any political party, a political actor, to involve violence or to incite their followers or members to carry out violence. And when they do that, it becomes a criminal offense. And there are appropriate sanctions that will be meted out to such parties. They'll be fined to the political party, to the political actors who have been found wanting in this regard, will be made to face the law. And murder is, if you kill someone, we have the appropriate provisions under the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria to sanction and to punish such persons who have done that.
But Todimu, we've never seen this happen before. We've never seen people implicated in political violence, at least not people in the top cadre of politics. But there is always the reference that they are linked to these violence. But we've never had any examples. Or are there any we might not know that have been brought to book in courts?
Well, like you said, some people have been brought to book. Most times, what happens in, when you go to court, you go with evidence, and the court would usually rule based on the preponderance of evidence that is available before it. So most times, these elements, these political actors would usually get people, political thugs, who will take the fall and will refuse to divulge who has paid them to perpetrate such acts. But I think that we should also go forward on that to ensure that if electoral violence is conducted, it's not rocket science to be able to identify that if an opponent was killed, who would have engineered the death of that opponent. I think that our law enforcement needs to do better in that regard.
Todimu Ige, thank you. Always a pleasure having conversation with you when it comes to legalese about any situation, this time the Osun elections. Thank you very much, Todimu Ige.